So welcome everyone to this HR Learn session on myth busting, government sourcing and recruitment. My name is Robin Scott, and I am a federal HR consultant and co-owner of Segment HR, a firm with specialty to federal HR and staffing. SHR is one of the fastest growing firms over the last 3 years, and our team of DEU certified HR specialists and consultants support multiple federal agencies in the recruitment, hiring, and onboarding process. Our list of clients include USDA, Department of Justice, and OPM, just to name a few. Prior to founding SHR, I spent over a decade in civil service, primarily as an HR specialist, recruitment and classification specialist myself. And so I also dabbled in employee relations and labor relations, but I didn't like that too much. So came back over the staffing because I'm a staffer at heart, to be honest. And I spent some of my time with the Department of Defense and the Civilian Human Resources Agency, or CHARA for short, as well as some time with the Department of Veterans Affairs, supporting the Albuquerque VA Regional Office. And I've had a few stops in the private sector as well with some Fortune 500 companies. And due to that background of both federal and private sector, I have developed a 360 viewpoint of all stakeholders during the hiring and recruitment process. Hiring managers want their vacancies filled quickly. Okay, they are dealing with loss of production and burnout from their current staffs. And HR specialists like me and like some of you who are taking the session want to be able to assist your selecting officials with the most efficient hiring process possible while keeping federal regulations top of mind, right? And then there is another party who is often forgotten about, and that's the applicant. Applicants want a fair but quick process and a pleasant hiring and onboarding experience. So during this session, I'll use a lot of my own personal examples, but I will also cite several statistics associated with the recruitment life cycle, and specifically to the federal recruitment life cycle, and why some of the myths of recruiting for government can be overcome, or how they can be overcome. This session is scheduled for 1 hour. I believe your time said about an hour and a half, but we're going to keep it at an hour. And I want to ensure that I respect everyone's time. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and go over how the session will flow. So I like for my sessions to be as interactive as possible, right? So just to let you know the layout, we have about 40 minutes of content, and I'll have several stops for questions, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session dedicated to questions only if time permits, but I'll stop throughout to ask if there are any questions, and you may enter those throughout the presentation in the chat. The majority of the interaction will be by using these emojis right here. So if you hover over, I believe it's the bottom right of your screen, you should see something that looks like this, where you can raise your hand, you can clap, you can give a thumbs up. If you like what I'm saying, you could even love it if you're really into what I'm saying. Crying laugh face, if I say something that surprises you, you have that too. I'm not really sure why you would use the party sign at this point, but you're welcome to use that as well. But primarily, this is how we'll interact during this session. Everyone will be on mute the majority of the time, but as I said, if you have any questions along the way, there's no need for you to wait to the end of this presentation. You may enter your questions in the chat as they come to mind. So the next thing is, I'm actually need to do this right now. I'm turning my phone off right now. I just figured that the world will continue if I turn it off over the next 40 minutes. And I don't know about you all, but I find it distracting seeing my own talking face. So as we get along into the slides, I'm just going to turn my camera off as we're speaking, but I'll turn it on so that you all can see me as you're asking questions. So let's test out these emojis. If you can hear me okay, and if you have found where to use your emojis, why don't you give me a thumbs up? Okay, okay. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Brandon, Dave, Ashley, okay. All right, looks like it's working. Okay, and I have a caveat. A lot of the information provided in this session will need to be applied per your specific agency policy. So I may not be able to speak specific to your agency, and you may hear a lot of things that you can apply right away, but I've been in your shoes and I've registered for sessions like this. So if you're anything like me, there's been times that I've taken courses or sessions like this and I think, well, that's not how we do it in my agency. And guess what? That's okay. And I say all of that to say, I'm aware that a lot of the things that I'll go over and suggestions that I made, you may not be able to apply right away, but the goal is that you are at least will be able to open up the discussion with your prospective organizations. So give me a thumbs up or a love or a crying laugh face, whatever emoji you want to use. And if you're ready to get started. All right, it's working. All right. Okay, so during this session, and just one second, I'm going to turn my camera off. As I told you all, it's distracting when I see my own talking face. So during this session, you will hear some terms you may not be familiar with. My hope is by the end of this session, you should leave with a basic understanding of additional hiring flexibilities and tools you may use to recruit for in the federal government that you weren't already aware of. And we're here to discuss myths, right? So we'll get into that too. And so we'll definitely cover that and review some real life scenarios of how to overcome some of the barriers in federal hiring. And lastly, you will be more familiar with federal agencies who are already implementing some of the progressive recruitment tactics that we will discuss. Again, just keep top of mind, the objective of this session is to provide you with information that you may be able to go back and apply right away, and at the very least, broach the topic and begin to discuss it at your respective organizations. All right, so in this next section, just going to show you some things that may surprise you. Some of these things you may have already known. I know as I was doing my research to conduct this session, there were some things that surprised me. So did you know that 35% of federal agencies already use social media, commercial ads, or third-party job boards to find talent? Give me a thumbs up or raise your hand if that's something that you were already aware of. Because I'll tell you, I was surprised by that number. I thought it was something that I thought it was much lower. Now, that tells me that about 65% of federal agencies do not use any form of social media or sourcing or recruitment activities. And so to compare that to our private sector counterparts, about 80% of our private sector counterparts use some form of social media recruiting or sourcing or recruitment activities, third-party job boards like LinkedIn and Indeed and Monster. So keep this stat in mind as we move along. Did you know that 52% of people who apply for jobs are underqualified? Now, I'm not sure if that surprises anyone, but I will tell you, I've had some hiring managers who have received their shortlist or referral list, as we call it, on the federal side, and they've not been happy. And if that resonates with any of you, whether you're a hiring manager or you're a staffer like me, when the outcome of the list has not been what's expected, if that resonates with you, just raise your hand or put something in the chat. I will tell you, I've been on the bad side of that many times where there was just a disconnect and I was sending people who my hiring managers did not believe was qualified. But I will say 52% was surprising to me. So over half of the people who apply for jobs across the board have been determined to be underqualified. Did you know that 36% of the workforce is actively looking for a new opportunity? So I will tell you, as a business owner, that's something that is concerning for me. So just imagine this. If you have a team of 10 people, right, that means 3 to 4 people of your current team, they're looking for jobs right now. And 90% of the workforce are not actively looking, but they're willing to leave for the right opportunity. So let's just take that same scenario. So your team of 10 people, you know, whether you're an employer or you're a supervisor, you have a team of 10 people, 9 people can be lured away, right? And they can be reached out to and recruiters can find them. And if the money is right, the schedule is flexible and the work environment is a good environment to work in, they are willing to leave for the right opportunity. Now, this was a very important stat that I found, and it's very relevant to what we will be discussing later. Up to 60% of job seekers report that they have quit an application due to its length or complexity. And then finally, sourced or recruited candidates are more than 2 times as efficient than candidates who apply. So if I number these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 1 through 6, let me know which statistics surprised you. You can just enter that in the chat, enter 1, enter more than 1, 1, 2. If 1 and 6 surprised you, enter that in the chat. I will tell you several of these surprised me, but many of them didn't. So the goal is to fill federal positions at 80 days or fewer. Now, raise your hand if your agency has been successful in doing this, and forgive me for laughing, but if you raise your hand that your agency has successfully filled a job opening in 80 days, I need you to put your private telephone information, send me a direct number to you, because I will say you are definitely in the minority if you've been successful in doing this. Too bad actually that there aren't any praying hands emoji. Again, that's the goal, but the real numbers show something different. In fiscal year 17, it took about 106 days to fill openings in the federal government. And fiscal year 18, it went down a little bit. And that's around the time that it really opened up to be able to use more direct hiring authorities. And for those who aren't familiar with what a DHA is, in summary, it makes it easier for the federal government to be able to bring people on who are not current federal employees for critical and hard to fill positions. So it did go down some. Now look at for the private sector. In 2020, it took an average of 42 days to fill an opening. And I will let you all know this, having worked in the private sector, they believe that that is slow. Their goal typically is to try to fill their positions within 30 days, okay? And so the federal government is at a great disadvantage to attract and hire top talent due to the extensive and cumbersome application process. If you recall from that slide that I had that had all of the different statistics, 60% of applicants will drop out of an extensive hiring process. While the federal government is still waiting for a job posting to close, its private sector counterparts are already at the offer stage. So by a show of hands, how many of you have found yourself at the tentative offer phase, whether you're an HR specialist and you're making that offer or you're the one doing the hiring, and you've gotten to the phase where you're ready to make the job offer, but the applicant has already found another position. I've been there. It's frustrating. And it's even more frustrating when you get to the point where you've gotten with an applicant and you're about to make a final job offer, but sometimes the federal processes take so long. These applicants are applying to multiple places and we miss out as federal employers. So I have a question for the group. We have now defined sourcing, and this is what the technical definition of sourcing is, and we'll go over that. But is there anyone out there who already knows what a sourcer does or what sourcing is? And if so, if you can just take about maybe 20 seconds to type a brief description of, you know what, I'm not gonna let you all cheat. I'm gonna take that definition away. So if you have an idea of what sourcing is, and if you don't know, it's okay, because this may be a new term to a lot of people, but if you could just take maybe just about 20 seconds and enter some responses in the chat, just so I can gauge to see where we are as far as familiarity with this term sourcing before we get into the technical definition.
We do have a response from David, spending time finding people versus waiting for them to find you. Also from R. Castillo, the methods used to find talent, Colin Moore, active passive activities to attract candidates to any organization roles. And Lauren, sourcing is when you utilize tools to find candidates for positions you need to fill positions.
Awesome. All excellent responses. Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I will say that. Yes, you all were right on the money. And I will tell you that you're ahead of the game if this is already a term that you're familiar with. In other words, a sourcer is a hunter. While I was practicing this presentation, I kept saying sorcery. So to be clear, I'm saying sorcerer. A sorcerer or someone who performs the activity of sourcing, think of it as a hunter. It is a sourcer's job to go where the applicants are. Applicants may not be aware that they must apply on USA Jobs, and this may come as a surprise to us lifers in the federal government, but the majority of the applicant population has never heard of USA Jobs. Okay, this is where you all need to put the surprised emoji, okay? Sarcasm, I hope you caught that. A sourcer is looking for passive candidates who are not actively job seeking. Going back again to that slide where I showed up to 90% of candidates are not actively seeking a job, but they're willing to leave their current position for the right opportunity. It is a sourcer's job to scale job boards, social media, uncover hidden talent pools of the hiring manager's ideal candidate. The majority of top candidates are not actively applying. So it is a sourcer's goal to find them. So I have another question. And I know it's early. I hope, everybody's had their coffee, but I have another question. In your current role, whether you are on the HR specialist side where you're advising hiring managers or you're the selecting official, you make the hiring decision, do you believe that your current organization performs any type of activity that resembles sourcing? Or is it more of a, posting on USA Jobs or posting and waiting for applicants to apply? And if your agency is already doing these things, you can just give me a thumbs up. You don't have to respond.
We do have some responses. David said, no way. Jacob said, minimal, we don't always have the bandwidth. Lauren also posting and waiting for applicants. Calling more, post and pray.
That's right. Thank you, Nancy. Post and pray. Dave, you win on the responses. I think, what did he say? No way. Yes, the post and pray approach. So, but if anyone gave a thumbs up, and I don't have the chat up right now, you're ahead of the game, but I will, as you saw from the previous slide, the majority of federal agencies are not doing this. So about 35% are conducting some version of it, but 65% are not. And just to remind you, about 80% of our private sector counterparts are. And if this is a term that is new to you, then you're not alone. So I'm going to go over the technical definition according to the Society of Human Resources Managers, and it's what you see here on your screen. They're proactive searching for qualified job candidates for current or planned open positions. It is not the reactive function of reviewing resumes and applications sent to the company in response to a job posting or pre-screening candidates. So the latter part of that definition sounds a lot like what we do right now in the federal government, right? All right. So next, recruiting. Recruiting defined. We're going to define recruiting, but it's more likely a word most of us are already familiar with. And though you may have varying definitions of what the role of a recruiter is, I think we all have a general idea of what a recruiter does. Some of us even have recruitment and placement in our job titles. I know that when I was a current federal employee, that was my job title, HR specialist, recruitment and placement classification. So we're going to define what some of the things that a recruiter does. A recruiter does more than one thing. A recruiter helps prep for the ideal candidate. That sounds pretty similar to what I would do as an HR specialist, helping the hiring manager prep for the ideal candidate, right? We call that job analysis, and we'll say that's similar to prepping for the ideal candidate. A recruiter also may have sourcing duties. It's sometimes a separate position, but a recruiter may incorporate a form of sourcing and his or her duties as well. A recruiter is the face of the organization and engages with candidates. I call it selling the sizzle, okay? That's not trademarked. You can use it, sell the sizzle. You're selling the salary, ha, 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 for federal government salaries, right? But you can leverage the benefits. You're leveraging the organization's mission, okay? In the work culture, right now, a lot of places are working 100% remotely. I know my team all works remotely. These are the type of things that I'm referring to when I say selling the sizzle. Those are some of the things that a recruiter does. A recruiter screens and sends the shortlist. That sounds very similar to what current HR specialists do. That's what we do when we're sending the referral list and we're going through applicants. A recruiter may also conduct reference checks. This may not be as common on the federal side, but in the private sector, very common part of the duty. And a recruiter takes that candidate from discovery all the way through his or her first day. So in short, a recruiter takes the pipeline that the sourcer has provided, okay, if it's a separate duty. Recruiters will post jobs, analyze resumes, as I said, sell benefits and the branding of the company. That's an underutilized duty on the federal government. Sell the benefits and the branding of the organization. Selling the vacation time, the mission, when pay may be an issue. The recruiter's job may include scheduling interviews as well. Overall, the recruiter's job is to manage and oversee the full process. So in summary, as an HR specialist, a current federal HR specialist, we may already perform recruitment duties to some level, though we often may not be involved in reference checks or selling the sizzle, right? But a lot of these things we're already doing. So I'm just going to pause right there. And if there are any questions before we move over to some of these myths, I'm just going to take a few seconds to see if anyone has entered any new comments or questions in the chat.
We do have a question from David. Does sending a JOA link out to staff count as sorcery?
Wait, say that one more time, Nancy.
We do have a question from David. Does sending a JOA link out to staff count as sourcing?
That is a form of sourcing. your internal team can also be sourced. Remember, sourcing is going where the applicants are. There are times where your most fertile applicant pool is internal. So sending the JOA, so job opportunity announcement is what that stands for, sending the link to that to your internal team in the building or within the agency may also be a form of sourcing as well.
Thank you. We also have a question from Lauren. Would you consider data mining as part of sourcing?
Absolutely. Great question, Lauren. Absolutely. Again, a sorcerer is a hunter. In the private sector recruiters and sorcerers don't like to be called headhunters, frankly, but that's what you're doing. You're going out there and you're scaling all of these job boards, and there are job boards specific to certain industries. Okay, for engineering, there's Tech Fetch. I'm not sure if you all have heard of that, or for clearance jobs, contracting jobs for the federal government. I think it's called clearance jobs, actually, clearancejobs.com. There are job boards that are specific to specific industries and professions where a sorcerer can go, and there's a database of resumes where you can put in certain searches, and I won't get too much into the weeds as far as what Boolean searches are and things like that, but you can put in certain competencies and skill sets, and a list of candidates that fit your criteria will come up, and you reach out to them. Okay, so yeah, great question, Lauren. And Nancy, got time for one more before we move on.
We actually don't have any further questions.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so we all came here to discuss myths, right? And busting those myths of implementing sourcing and recruiting into the current federal hiring process. So I'm going to share with you the top 3 responses of 50 surveyed current practicing federal HR specialists. So the number one reason, or I should say concern, of implementing sourcing or recruiting, non-traditional recruiting for the federal government, I should say, is a concern that it may result in preselection or veterans preference violations. The number two response was, our agency doesn't allow us to recruit outside of usajobs.gov. And the number 3, or the third most frequent response, or some version of this, is we have too much work to do. How are we going to add one more thing, right? So we're going to break these down one by one. And we'll start with this first one, pre-selection or veterans preference violations. In other words, there is an overarching concern that some form of a prohibited personnel practice would be violated. So as a federal HR practitioner, we have an obligation to safeguard the integrity of the federal recruitment process, right? And it may be necessary to educate our hiring managers of how to avoid a prohibited personnel practice. I'm just going to say PPP from here on out, because that's a lot. That's a mouthful. But how we avoid that is through a thorough job analysis process prior to discussing a specific individual, right? So there is no greater risk of violating veterans preference through the addition of sourcing activities or pre-selection. Sourcing and recruitment activities are very similar to what occurs in the current process when we are identifying non-competitive candidates. And so, I'm not going to assume everyone's level of staffing and familiarity with some of these terms, but a non-competitive candidate, there are certain veterans and other eligibilities someone may have where they are not required to apply on USA Jobs or in any form. You can just take their information. We call it off the street or through email, and they can be interviewed or not and be hired without that, right? So that's what I'm referring to when I say non-competitive. So if we are conducting a thorough job analysis And when that hiring manager and the HR specialist come together for, for collaboration of how to fill that vacancy, the position description or PD should be verified and the duty should be confirmed and agreed upon between the HR manager and the HR specialist. And then we should be identifying competencies and skills not tailored to a specific person. So we are focusing on the duties of the position and not a person that we're trying to hire. That's nothing different than what we're already doing. If we take those steps, as all agencies and HR professionals are required to, which is conducting a thorough job analysis or using a previously used one, then that's how we're able to avoid pre-selection. So I have had hiring managers, whether they knew better or not, and I'm not going to name the agency or the person to protect the innocent, okay? And this is being recorded too, so I definitely wouldn't do that. But I have had a hiring manager come to me, they have an urgent need, and have asked me, have said, here's this person's resume. Can we just tailor the PD and the specialized experience to this person? Because this is the person I want to hire. That's pre-selection, okay? What pre-selection is not is, as I said, just in the normal conversation of a recruitment discussion, and after you've conducted your job analysis and you have your wish list and your ideal candidate, and then the selecting manager says, well, I really want Dave to apply. Dave has this skill set. I would really like to see Dave apply. That's a name select. That's not pre-selection. And so to transfer this to the sourcing and recruiting world, if the HR specialist then goes out and does data mining, as Lauren brought up earlier, and scales some job boards and finds some resumes and some ideal candidates based on the skill set that's predetermined and sends some names to the selecting official, that is not pre-selection, okay? And in terms of violating veterans preference should always be applied where appropriate. There are instances where it will not apply. And there are instances where veterans preference must be applied, such as a delegated examining or public announcement. So as HR specialists, in summary, this is our opportunity to educate our managers to help avoid both of those things. So this myth has been debunked, okay? As I mentioned before, our current processes mitigate violations of a PPP through thorough job analysis. We'll move on to the next one. Number 2, my agency does not allow me to use or to recruit outside of usajobs.gov. Raise your hand if you've thought this or you've heard this before. So this is an interesting one. So upon conducting my research, I determined that this is partially debunked. It depends. It depends is the answer that everyone hates that when we give that as HR specialists, right? It does depend. I will tell you, in most instances, even with the most restrictive collective bargaining agreement. So for those of you who have worked in union environments, you know what I'm talking about. But even in the most restrictive CBAs, it is allowable to post on outside job boards, such as LinkedIn, Indeed, or industry-specific boards. It is important to go where the applicants are. You'll continually hear me say that throughout this presentation. And you'll have the opportunity to funnel them to usajobs.gov if there is a requirement to apply through that method. For example, I have had organizations who were afraid of pre-selection or committing a prohibited personnel practice, or they just weren't aware of certain hiring flexibilities that they could use. And so I would hear that we're not allowed, or I thought we were only allowed to post things on usajobs.gov. And so once we would discuss this during our recruitment discussion, yes, if it's a situation where you're required, Mr. or Ms. Hiring Manager, and you have to put that on usajobs.gov, here are some options here. You can still put that on LinkedIn or Indeed or Monster or name it, or send that link to your professional organization, the Society of Professional Engineering, whatever it is, and just include the link in the posting. As I mentioned before, a lot of applicants have no federal experience. They do not know to look on USA Jobs, but they know to look on LinkedIn. They know to look on ZipRecruiter, Monster, Indeed, and those platforms have talent acquisition features which invite applicants to apply and does a lot of the work of a sourcer. So imagine sleeping as LinkedIn software reaches out to your ideal candidate with a message to apply to your job, okay? These platforms have powerful contact features as well to reach out to a mass amount of passive candidates simultaneously. Again, they're not actively looking, but they kind of have their resume hanging out there just in case, right? So where you as the HR specialist can send a mass message inviting them to apply. As a matter of fact, since I mentioned LinkedIn, and I wish they were paying me to say this, but they're not. LinkedIn specifically is one of the most common recruitment tools for recruiters, as the users, anyone who has a profile has the ability to discreetly let you know as the recruiter or the sourcer that they're open. So once you go in and you're looking for your ideal candidates, you can see where people have their hands raised behind the scenes like, hey, I'm passively looking, but for the right opportunity, please reach out to me about your job opportunity. So in summary, the reason why I said this one is partially debunked, again, because it depends. Always checks specifically with your agency's merit promotion plan, as well as the collective bargaining agreement, just to ensure that you don't get in trouble with the union or with your merit promotion plan. And then number 3, this will add more work. When I was a staffer, I experienced burnout and the feeling that the work was endless, okay? You don't have to raise your hand on this one, but I know. It seems as if you're always being asked to do one more thing. So you'll find that statistically, sourcing and recruiting practices reduce the time to hire and improves the quality of the candidates, saves the agency money due to the higher level of retention once they come on board. And it may seem like more work on the front end, but on the back end, if qualified candidates are identified early in the process, it may reduce the need to even announce it. Or if it has to be announced, it reduces the opening time of the job announcement, and also significantly reduces the need to re-announce position. I've had the pain of that. Earlier, we mentioned 52% of applicants who apply are not qualified. So the hiring official gets that list and they're not happy with it. So it just sits because they can't just open up another one. And in a lot of cases, there may be a required waiting time up to 90 days before you can even re-announce it. So if we identify those quality candidates on the front end through sourcing and recruiting, and we're inviting them to apply to our announcement, that can cut out a significant amount of the full recruitment time. And as an example, again, I want to emphasize that we're doing a lot of these things already. When you suggest to the hiring official or hiring managers here on this session, when you're having these discussions and the HR specialist says, do you know of any candidates who are eligible for the VRA appointment, Veterans Recruitment Authority appointment, which some veterans are eligible for? And they say yes, or you're aware, to Dave's point, that there are some internal candidates who have held the grade and it's a lateral move. And you do not have to open that vacancy announcement. That can save you months sometime. Just a quick example that I had when I was supporting Department of Veterans Affairs. Ironically, the Department of Veterans Affairs weren't aware how often they could use VRA. And within their own building, they have something called a VOC rehab program that specializes in helping veterans find jobs. And for a lot of their jobs, they could use the VRA appointment based on the grade level. And so they ended up developing somewhat of a pipeline to have the employment counselors just send them packages of the veterans with all of their paperwork, paper resumes, believe it or not, in documents. And so we would just completely skip the process of putting it out there. And they would go right to just hiring these veterans after the interview. I will tell you the fastest onboarding time I've ever seen in the federal government was about 30 days. And that included the security clearance process, because we were able to skip being able to having to open that up on USA Jobs. So this was also debunked. Sourcing and recruiting has been proven to save cost and time. And let me just check and see where we are on time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move forward. As I said, I want to respect everyone's time. So in summary, number one, sourcing and recruitment may result in pre-selection of veterans preference violation. Well, we debunked that, right? I think that we did. Number two, agency does not allow us to recruit outside of usajobs.gov. I put an amber X right there just because, remember, it depends, right? Just depending on your agency's merit promotion plan or a collective bargaining agreement. But the most collective bargaining agreements do allow some form of posting outside of the internal workforce. And then number three, we have too much to do. We're understaffed. This will add more work, where, as I've just discussed, sourcing and recruiting activities, we're doing a lot of it already and a lot of your current practices. And it has been found to save time and reduce the time to fill. And it'll help us get more on par with our private sector counterparts. So throughout some of this, some of you may have thought, so we're not in the private sector, and it's harder for us to implement some of the things discussed, Robin. So here are a list of a handful of agencies that are already using some form of sourcing and recruitment. And this is not an all-inclusive list. These agencies have either contracted with a third-party sourcing and recruitment partner to assist with the process, or they have pulled these duties to the internal staffing team. If you go right now, I mean, I encourage you, I told you to turn your phones off, but for those of you who didn't listen to that, you can go on LinkedIn right now or Indeed and put in some keywords that you know will bring up federal positions. I think you can just type in federal, or for me, you know, I might type in HR specialist, federal HR specialist in the search. But if you go to those major job boards right now, you may find several of these agencies with open job postings on those third-party job boards right now, because again, it is important to go where the applicants are. Okay, so I know throughout that there have been some questions entered in the chat, and Nancy, we have time. We have time for several questions.
There was a question that came in by Scott. How can we ensure that veteran preference is not violated when seeking candidates outside of usajobs.gov?
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you, Scott. Well, as I was mentioning before, if we are conducting sound federal HR practices and you just do what you've always done, okay? I know that may sound funny or may not make sense, but we need to use the Code of Federal Regulations and ensure veterans' preference isn't violated with all hiring actions. This wouldn't be any different. So for instance, and not to get too much into the weeds on this, but if you do need to put out a job posting, okay, and it's DEU or it's out to the public, in most cases, veterans' preference will apply. You would not select a non-veteran over a veteran. Or in situations where you're using, we'll just say VRA, okay? And even though you can take those resumes and those documents off the street, or they may email them, If you have more than one VRA candidate in your office, then veterans preference even applies in that case, where the veteran that has the higher level of preference will receive preference over the other ones. It's no different. It's no different. And so in cases of sourcing and recruiting, and you're identifying candidates ahead of the process, and you have identified some sort of non-comp eligibility or a direct hiring authority where you can send them to apply for a direct hire authority, veterans preference doesn't apply for direct hiring authorities. And so I say all of that to say that veterans preference may not apply in all instances. And to ensure that it is not violated, we just have to, as HR professionals, make sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure we're applying veterans preference where it's appropriate.
Thank you. We also have another question from Lauren. If agencies aren't willing to put money into the budget in order to use outside job boards, what do you suggest we could do?
Thank you, Lauren. People don't realize how many free resources there are out there and trial periods. And Lauren, that's a really good question. I've been in that scenario where I've been told that, well, we don't have the budget for a LinkedIn account or Monster or something like that. There are a lot of free alternatives to be able to get them out there. It doesn't always have to be a paid subscription job board. The link can go out to professional organizations. As I mentioned before, as an example, the Society of Professional Engineers. You can send that link out so that they can distribute that amongst their population if that's the specific concentrated applicant pool that you're going for. Being in HR, and we're used to dealing with no budget or low budgets anyway, so you just have to be more creative, that's all. As well as partnering with the local schools and the local colleges and veterans organizations. I gave an example earlier about the organization I used to work for, VA, partnering with the Voc Rehab office, the Vocational Rehabilitation Office, where they specialize in helping veterans find jobs, qualified veterans who have certain degrees and things like that. So it doesn't always have to go on what we consider to be a job board. There are private job boards sometimes that we can send the link out to, or have a partnership with some of our community organizations so that they are sending us candidates, or we're reaching out to applicant pools that are specific to those job industries.
Thank you. We have another question from Ashley. If Sorcerers, our recruiters, are hired with an agency, does that mean HR specialist jobs become obsolete? Or I know some folks in federal government may feel their job is at jeopardy.
That's a great question, Ashley. What I can say about that is consider this. Consider if you're a current HR specialist and if you have a sourcing partner or a recruiting partner, these are your teammates, okay? These are your teammates, you work with them. It gives you the ability to be able to concentrate on some of the more complex duties. As you know, I think I mentioned earlier, it feels like your work is never done as a staffer, especially if you're carrying this process from start to finish, full life cycle. So imagine that you have a sourcing partner, okay, who is in on those conversations with you and the hiring manager. And as you're identifying key competencies and tasks and the wish list of the ideal candidate for the selecting manager, the sourcer goes to work and goes out to start and hunt, while you or me, we begin to put together that job posting if it's necessary, or we begin to be able to research and ensure that we're not violating veterans preference. We're able to then concentrate on the more analytical role of being an HR specialist. Having a sourcing third party, look at it as a partnership. No one is there to take over our jobs. I definitely don't see it that way. As a matter of fact, when I was a federal staffer, I wish that we had a sourcing partner because, as I said, you are at the mercy of who applies. If you don't have someone going out to where the applicants are and you're going in those tech group chats and social media closed group pages, and we're just hoping that someone sees our usajobs.gov link, even though they don't know it's there in the first place, you get what you get. Okay, so if you view it as a partnership and someone who enhances the process and makes our jobs easier as HR specialists, because if they're able to help us identify some of these top quality candidates, the ones that are in the best qualified category, then it reduces the need to have to re-announce that position, Ashley. So I don't see it as a situation where our jobs would be obsolete. I see it as an opportunity to help enhance what we do, which ultimately is to support our hiring managers in finding their ideal candidate.
Thank you. We have another question from David. Do you find that most agencies still require DHA requirements to include applications as opposed to really directly hiring?
Well, the term direct hire authority can be misleading because in a lot of cases, it does seem like you should be able to just pull somebody off, without them having to apply to USA Jobs. And it just depends on the direct hire authority. I will tell you this, Dave. In my experience, when hiring managers have the opportunity to not have to put it on USA Jobs, they take it, okay? And again, I'm giving the answer of it depends again, because some direct hire authorities still require that it goes on to usajobs.gov. I know a lot of DOD, DHA still require it, but whenever there's an opportunity and the agency can skip putting a job announcement out there, they take it. If anything, the only reason why I've seen that they've not wanted to do it is just fear that they're doing something wrong. We've gotten to a point where they're afraid that of stepping on a landmine and committing some prohibited personnel practice. So a lot of times they'll just still put it on USA Jobs just to make sure they're not breaking some rule, even though they're not required to. And Nancy, we have time for one more.
Okay, another question from Lauren. If we hire recruiters or sourcers, then what good are we?
Yeah, you know what? A lot of hiring managers, think that about us anyway. But I think Ashley asked the question as well. But I have the same answer to that. There is definitely still a need. So it's a partnership, as I said. A sourcer knows how to hunt and find the talent, but they may not know how to apply veterans preference, or they may not know that there's a certain provision in a collective bargaining agreement that requires a certain opening period, or that it has to be announced internally first, or that one must meet at least 1 year doing this, during XYZ, and must fully meet it. These are all the nuances that a seasoned HR specialist should know. And so again, it's a partnership. Sorcerer is good at what they do in finding the candidates and filling up the pipeline, but the HR specialists are there to make sure that everybody stays on track and that we stay in compliance with federal hiring regulations. And if I didn't get to your question, I apologize. As I said, I just wanted to be sure that we respect everyone's time, and we're getting pretty close to approaching the hour. Thank you all very much. If this is a subject that you want to know more about, or you want to expand a little more, I strongly recommend signing up for Recruiting for Government Talent Acquisition Basics, or leveraging direct hiring authorities, BHAs. These are full courses, and for anyone that purchases the course, go back and you talk to your agencies and and want to upskill more and expand your skill set, if you purchase a course, you receive a free 30-minute one-on-one coaching session with me or whomever the facilitator is of that subject, and we can discuss some specific agency policy and help you put together a game plan. And for those of you who miss it, we had a session on May 7th. And for those of you who missed it, we have another upcoming session on June 15th. And it looks really fun. It's called It's Okay to Say No in HR. And so it's June 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can find all of the courses and descriptions and topics that you may be interested in on hrlearn.com. And that concludes our presentation. And I appreciate all of your time and attentiveness, and have a great rest of the day.